The views and opinions expressed here are those of the interviewees and do not reflect the views of Fermanagh and Omagh District Council. Any content provided by contributors is of their own opinion and is not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organisation, company, individual, anyone or anything. These recollections are for entertainment purposes only and offer a historical window into Omagh's past.
I'm going back to Omagh to walk her streets again. I'll tip my hat to all the girls, shake hands with all my friends. I'll climb aboard the silver bird that flies across the foam. I'm on my way to Omagh in the county of Tyrone.
Hello again and a very warm welcome to our little podcast, Sweet Omagh Town Internet Radio. My name is Don McGurgan and it's an honour and pleasure to be with you here this evening. As you know, this is part of the Omagh Music Festival weekend running here in the Street Arts Centre between Thursday the 29th of September until Sunday the 2nd of October. We have much live entertainment for you as well as some pre-recorded material. Our special guests tonight need no introduction to radio. They've been at the business for longer than both of them would care to admit. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back and enjoy in conversation Father Brian Darcy and Frank Galligan.
Well, we're absolutely delighted to be here in the ground today with Father Brian Darcy. And Brian, wonderful to see you again. And
likewise, Frank.
We're getting organised for the big Omagh Music Festival that's coming up next weekend.
Delighted it's taking place. Delighted it's taking place. For the simple reason that night we were in memory of Pio, I was saying, did these people not understand what they've given to the wonderful era of entertainers in Ireland? And, you know, Omagh has really a trail that is as good as Nashville.
It's funny you should say that because my old friend and colleague Jerry Anderson, even though he was a dairyman, Jerry said openly, as much to annoy the dairy was, you know what Jerry was like, he said Omagh was the real music capital.
Oh yeah, there's no question, question. Especially the Showband era, because you know you had even the Melody Aces had people there from Omagh and the Clipper Carlton. They all Omagh was the centre of it. You had Frankie McBride and you had the Plattermen. You had St Eugene's band actually was one of the greatest places that anybody could have trained in the brass sections and stuff. So they had a head start on everybody else, and because there were the show bands, they did need a brass section.
Yes.
And if you had a brass section, you were very unique. And the best brass sections came from that area, you know, because of the brass band, there. And Omagh has a right to have a real say in remembering the incredible contribution to the entertainment industry, to the recording industry, and to the success of pop groups across the world afterwards, because the showband industry was centred around there, and they were the first people, you know, apart from Brendan Bowyer, they were really the first people to get up and make shows. Brendan was the first to record, but Brendan would, God be good to him, would literally tell you that he learned everything from the Clipper Carlton Showband. Clipper Carlton Showband. And in fairness, and Brendan told me this, and he's a gentle fella, as you know, Brendan, God be good to him. Yeah. And he told me that, and I said, I know where you got Hucklebuck from. You presumably got it from Frank Sinatra's recording, which is Dyer, by the way.
Yes.
And he said, no, I didn't. He said, no. He said, I got it from the Clipper Carlton, who always did it as a showpiece number. But he said, Tom Dunphy and myself heard it. We went to see them because we always went to see them, and we heard them doing it, and we said, you know, that's a good old number, but it should be a quick step. It should be written up. So the boys rehearsed it, and they were playing it in the band for probably a year, as to be almost to the Clipper Carlton, and so that was it. And then they went into Abbey Road to record 2 other songs, and the guy says to them at the end, "You've got half an hour left." He said, you don't want to put another old track down when you're here? Boy says, we haven't rehearsed something. And the guy said, sure, we're playing that Hucklebuck thing. So they came up, started, and they took it. They took one straight take, live. Vocals, brass, the saxophone solo, everything live. And they did a reverb on it for Brendan, sang harmony with himself. He did the double tracking.
Isn't that a wonderful
and
story?
It was over. That was, and as soon as the boys heard it, they said, "That's a hit," and it ran all the way home, which was the original one they recorded. They scrapped. They had another hit with it, but the Hucklebug took it, and it became the biggest. It was biggest selling first one to sell over 100,000 singles in Ireland.
That's really fascinating stuff because...
And there's the Clipper Carlton, that's right. And there's a guy, you see, the guy's heard it, said, you know, that could be, you know, done a quick step, it's too slow, it's a showpiece number, and it shouldn't be. It should be a dancing number. And they did the upbeat to a dancing, and we're playing it in the halls, and it was going down reasonably well, but nobody was going mad about it. No. But they said, you know, it'll be a great number. As soon as the guy heard it in Abbey Road studio, he said, forget those others, that's your hit.
And it was.
And it was less than half an hour.
And I think the thing about the Hucklebug as well as being an extraordinary and iconic hit, the influence one song had on other show bands. They saw, more of this, please.
Oh, definitely. And it was, you see, up until then, Brendan was an Elvis fanatic, as most of us were. And they were doing, and ran all the way home's an Elvis song, and Kiss Me Quick and all of those. And Brendan was going through albums of Elvis to get ones that weren't hit singles. So that and that's where he got his hit tracks from. But this was, for all intents and purposes, an original Elvis that Elvis never heard.
My goodness.
And it was an Elvis track with all the vibrancy and all the enthusiasm, but it had the unique sax solo in the middle of it. And it was, people said it wasn't Michael Coppinger, God be good to him, who did that. It was Michael Coppinger, live. It was the band did it live in the studio.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is a little bit of history anyway.
On the subject of history, you're originally from Balnalek, a place I know well. I've been in search of the elusive Big Pike there for years, but I'll keep trying.
I'll keep on the shore road, you are in at the shore, Corrigan's at the shore,
indeed.
You go in there. And of course the McConnells are famous Balnalek people too.
Now, before we even talk about the vocation and about becoming the I suppose the padre for the music industry, what are your early memories of growing up in Balnalek as regards music, maybe listening to something that made you go, oh?
Well, there are two sets of memories in it. One is traditional music. The McConnells were our neighbours. You had the Art McMurrough Cayley Band. And you had Jimmy Spinner Maguire on the button key accordion. You had Pete Flanagan on the fiddle. Do you know what I mean? And you had somebody. There was actually an uilleann pipe player. I loved the sound of the uilleann pipes. Now I never liked the sound of the other pipes at all. Strangely enough, the bagpipes, because that another reminder of something else altogether. But the uilleann pipes I thought were the loveliest instrument you could ever hear playing. And we used to have them. And the concerts in Arnie playing. Then you'd get people up and singing an old song. Some fellas got up, song it, and I used to say, you know, that's the song the old cow died with. It was that boring. So it was not a great thing when somebody said that's the song the old cow died with. But then you had others then, and that's a lovely song. And you know, there was the McBriens, and there was various people who sang songs, and there were that's the only entertainment we had. I mean, that was the Royal Variety performance as far as we were concerned. Maybe 3 concerts a year. So you had that whole thing, which was very strong and traditional. Not too many. There wasn't too much teaching. I wish there had been. I would have learned an instrument, and I would love to have had an instrument. Even the tin whistle, I'd love to have an instrument, but I don't. So there wasn't any of that around it. The other one was 208 on the dial. Radio Luxembourg.
Great. I remember it well.
And I got 208 on the dial, and I couldn't study without listening to music. And my father used to say, turn that damn thing off. How can you study if you're listening to that? I can't study without listening to that, and neither I could. I listened, I had to listen to music, and so you had, Pete Murray and all the guys there, and I happened to meet Pete later in BBC, and we had great chats about it. Lovely, lovely man. He was the man that Pete Murray was the man that Larry Gogan mobbed himself on. He and Pete was and Pete told Larry one simple thing as a DJ. He said, Larry, don't ever write a script. Write 2 lines, because if you have a script, you'll say too much.
Yeah.
And if you have 2 lines, it'll be enough.
That's right. And if you have a script, you won't listen. But you have to do.
So
it,
and Larry was the same. I mean, Larry was just a genius at it. And then Pete Murray wanted Larry to go over to Luxembourg.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, but Larry had a couple of children and he couldn't go, and that was the end of that. But sure, he did all right. Larry did more than all right in his place.
Yeah.
So that's where the other section of music came in. And then, of course, and later still a wee bit, RTE began to open in the middle of the day. Before that, there was news in the morning, 2 or 3 sponsored programs closed down. Open for news at 1 o'clock, 2 or 3 sponsored programs closed down, and open for children's programs at 5 o'clock. And then the Irish Hospital Sweepstakes program finished the damn thing at night. Enough to put anyone mad, never mind asleep. If you wish upon a star, remember that thing you used to say? It doesn't matter where you can wish upon a star. And that was, you see, that was all your music. That was all you had.
Of course.
We had an old wind-up record player, but she was only 70 years. Doctor, your jaw and your cuddle of oil is so pure and so strong. And stuff. It was desperate stuff. and so that was what you listened to all the time.
Sure.
But the big break came for me when I was sent to Omagh to pass the 11 plus.
Oh.
Obviously, I went down to my aunt, Mrs. Donnelly in Omagh, which is opposite the Foresters Hall, beside Jackie Taggart's, all of that. Yeah. And it was a boarding house, so there's always Paddy Devlin boarded in at the famous referee. Yes. He boarded in that house, and I was there, and I got so much influence in that. Sean and Donald Donnelly were playing for Tyrone at that time. Hugh was too, he got just immersed in football. But across the road is the Foresters Hall, and there was young bands. Brian Coll was a cub at school, just ahead of me at school. And then all of a sudden, at the end of it all, fellas like Pat Chesters and Ray and the boys began to practice together, and they eventually became the Plattermen. And Brian came from the Polka Dots to the Plattermen. And that's it. And I remember going down to second night of Christmas in the Foresters Hall. I just thought this was the most wonderful sound that you could ever hear. Yeah. And Brian Cole's voice just at that stage was, oh my God. And he was doing Elvis numbers at that point.
He was the best in his time.
I was. Brian was the best in his time, no question. And you had, I think it was Johnny Murphy was in that band too, on the drums, and he was there, and you had Ray and Leo and all of them. And then I was a great friend later with the boys in the band, because when I went to study for the priesthood at 17 in Dublin, we had no money, and I discovered that if the Plattermen were playing in Dublin, they'd stay in the place, and you'd go down and you'd get a free cup of tea for the boys and maybe a biscuit. And that's then when I met them, I met every other band.
So that's how it started.
That's how it started.
That's how it started.
Wow. That's how it started. Yeah.
And was it more challenging being a chaplain with fellas who were relatively successful, had a few bob, were on the road? Were their problems more magnified than Father Brian Darcy in what we'd call a normal parish? I'm just curious.
I was still running a normal parish at the time. Was a curate at that stage, and I used to finish work at 11 o'clock, get on my Honda 50 and a crash helmet, and down to visit as many ballrooms as I could before 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
On the Honda 50.
My goodness.
Yeah. 1970 started that. Yeah. And I was nobody ever appointed me to the chaplain. The boys just said, if they were in trouble, they came to me. I was actually writing for a newspaper under an assumed name, because I wasn't allowed to read a paper as a student. And Albert Reynolds, God be good to him, he started a magazine called The Longford Dancing News. Yes. And he asked me to write for Eddie Masterson, was the big man, God be good to Eddie, a solicitor who lived in the same room in Barry's Hotel for 17 years.
My God, I never knew that about Eddie.
Oh, that's what Eddie did in Barry's Hotel. Yeah. And he never had an office. His office was a tweed coat on the inside. There was 3 pockets in that and 3 pockets in that. And Paddy had this, and Eddie had this, and he chain smoked. And, there was a nice little round of nicotine from there, because he never took the cigarette out over his top lip, because he never took the cigarette out of his mouth. He died at 47 from a brain hemorrhage. Oh, wow. Brain hemorrhage. But by that, it was he wrote the tribute to Jim Reeves for the Mighty Avens.
Oh, right.
Eddie Masterson did that for them. and he was just a genius. You know, Gene Stewart, God be good to Gene, Peter,
Gentleman,
Eddie couldn't drive, so Peter Smith, who was Gene's manager, he left, he was Gene's manager, and he said, he was in the Tudor rooms, he said, I want to go across to the television club. And Peter says, I'll drive you over, just across Dublin, no problem, 10 minutes run. And Peter says to him, do you know what it is? He said, Peter got a kind of a brusque way of talking. He said, do you know what it is? I'm looking for a good Christmas record for Stuart and I can't get one. What sort of one do you want? Well, you know, there's no original ones. Nobody's. What new can you say about Jesus being born? He's born, that's it. It's just Peter, you know. Well, he says, we might be able to say something else about coming home. And he took out a Sweet Afton packet and tore the back of it. And on the white side of the Sweet Afton packet, he wrote and wrote and wrote. And by the time he had got over, he had a verse and a chorus written of Christmas in Connemara.
Oh my goodness! And which became a
big hit.
Big hit. Exactly.
And that's how things are written, you know. And you know, and all of that seems unusual now. You know, even at that, the band lads deserve great credit because, you see, when Brenton Bowyer and them wanted to record in 1962, they had to go to England because there was no studio in Ireland to record. And EMI said that, you know, that they would bring them over to, and it was, they were in Abbey Road before the Beatles were.
Sure.
And they did that, and then Eamon Andrews copped that on, and he opened a studio. And Bill O'Donovan did the records. And it was often said that the true story of Irish show bands could never be written, for a simple reason, that there was only three people who could write it. Bill O'Donovan, who produced all the records, myself, and Eddie Masterson, who defended them in court every time they got into trouble.
And who passed away sadly.
And he passed away. So it was said it could never be written because Bill O'Donovan used to say, Eddie's dead, the laws of libel won't allow me to tell who actually played in the records, and the laws of God won't allow you to tell what the boys did. So he said, the true show...
Wasn't a double bind, a treble bind.
So the true Showband story will never be written.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I suppose, in a way, fate played a hand in this, because you had your connections in Omagh, obviously, and then fortuitously, that's where most of the big show, or many of the big show bands emanated from.
From that area, anyway. You know, if you take that area. And I suppose later on in Enniskillen, a few bands too, but Omagh was the heart of it, and Eugene's band really was the heart of it, to be honest. For the brass section, that's where they all came from. Now, they didn't produce singers like Frankie McBride and Brian, but nevertheless, would there have been anybody willing to listen to Frankie McBride or Brian if there hasn't a big brass sound, the big show band thing that the Clippers and the Melody Aces, we mustn't forget Che Hutchison and the Melody Aces, we mustn't forget them either, and of course the Turbits were from Tyrone, were from Omagh too, Melody Aces as well, and Newtown Stewart is only down the road a bit, you see, so sure, that area is made an amazing contribution to the entertainment industry, and I've always believed that Omagh never really took credit. Well, no, I wouldn't say that.
Right,
they just hadn't the foresight to take the credit.
I see.
Nobody gives you credit.
No, you have to
take it.
In Derry, there'll be a bit more brash.
Well, of course, you know, as you know, in Derry, there's no musician ever was born outside Derry.
Yes, exactly.
as I used to joke with Jerry Anderson very frequently.
I heard it.
We used to have great crack because I was in doing my program. We used to have great crack. Jerry and myself.
He was
so and he was the best liar I ever met. Do you know what I mean? He was, and he wouldn't sue me for that. He would actually say that is the greatest tribute you can give me, because he could tell a story that was an utter lie and convince you.
He would.
You know, and he was
Ray Moore was doing an odd Derry joke when we were rehearsing last night, right? And
you rehearsed? Oh no, Frank, you don't have to rehearse.
Oh, listen, it's like Oscar Wilde, rehearse spontaneity. You know, you organise yourself. But Ray says, you know, Frank, he says, he was saying about identifying people where they're from. He says, you can always tell a Derry man, but he says, you can tell him nothing. Oh, he's so funny. Right?
Ray is a great character.
And there he was tinkling away.
He has these things a bit Groucho Marx, you know.
Yes, he has.
He's like that, just they're coming out of him all the time.
He loves them actually, like grenades, you know.
And he'd be listening or you'd miss them.
Oh, very much so, you know. But it's so exciting for Omagh, like people like Don, who's a
Yes.
died in the old Omagh man and whatever,
Yes.
to see all of this coming on. And even though I'm not from the town, I've had a lot of association through radio and everything there, and just watching even Frank Coll singing Brian songs last night, like tugged at the heart, because I knew Brian very well and interviewed him. And I was brought up in Carrigart, North Donegal, and Brian's mother. The Kileys, you say, they used to come on holidays to Carrigart, and I remember when Brian Coll used to come on holidays to Carrigart, the town came to a standstill in the early 70s. He was that big a star, and always immaculately dressed.
And as thin as a whippet.
And Ben Kiley was related to them.
Oh, sure, no, Ben.
The other way.
Well, Ben was his uncle.
Yes,
Brian's uncle,
absolutely.
yeah.
So,
no, Ben used to say to me in Dublin, you talked very ponderously. He was a Jesuit for a while, and remained a Jesuit in accent anyway, and he was wonderful. He'd say, Ron, I have a nephew in that business that you're the chaplain to. He's quite a good singer,
Brian Coll, isn't that great? I can hear him saying it, yeah.
He's quite a good singer,
Kiley was a great radio man. I loved him dearly. That voice,
brilliant.
as you say, was...
And his pictures, pictures that he could, pictures he evoked on radio. He didn't need a television. He was you walked the roads, as you fished in the ponds.
You did.
He was just such an amazing talent. And he just had a real voice that you would recognise instantly.
Yeah.
And he had a way of telling a story. Didn't vary much the way he told the story, but it was always, you knew the way, almost like the fellow that used to read the sports result, you knew by the intonation of his voice whether it was a draw or a win or a home win. It's the same with Ben. You almost knew how the story was going from the intonation of his voice.
Yes, I know, just extraordinary. It was interesting you were talking about the way the different towns' confidences are, like Derry has it vis-a-vis Omagh and whatever, because my mother often said, and she's from Kilcar originally, she's 92 and thank God she's well. Still alive and can sing. She was a beautiful singer. She was so good that RTE came down to Kilcar in the 1940s to persuade her, because it was live stuff they did at the time. She was such a good singer, and she stuck Dublin for a while, but she got homesick and came back. But I used to say to her, I said, they're Derry, or they're always reminding me how great they are for singing or whatever. And a lovely Kilcar accent, Mammy says, she says, it's not that they were any better singers than the Donegal ones, she says, but they had a bit of push in them. And I love the way she said it in the Kilcar accent, and I understand that.
But you have to admire them too.
You have to.
This Patrick O'Hagan.
Oh yes.
From the same street as Michael O'Duffy.
Yeah.
And the same street as Locke.
Yeah. Joseph. Yeah.
All one. That's a hell of a thing.
Oh, sure, I know.
That's a hell of a thing to come from one town, town street.
It's quite something.
And they were all, musical. And all very good. So you have to give them credit, but not as much credit as they take.
No.
But
they deserve more. Exactly. That's the very important thing. As regards life in general and music, things are evolving, and the Showbands are there no longer. There's loads of musicians, and you mentioned Brendan Bowyer, and you knew many of them. And I always think of the extraordinary affection that Irish people have. I was in Mullingar a few years ago, and passing Joe Dolan's statue, I noticed an Ulster bus parked there, and I knew by the accents the women are coming from East Belfast, and they were firing their scarves around Joe's neck and getting their footies tuck. But I listened to the banter, and I laughed out loud at something one of them said, you see. And the wee woman turned round, she says, "What are you laughing at?" And where are you from? I said, "From Donegal." "Bet you don't have a statue," she says, "to Daniel." I says, "No, we have a shrine." And we had the best night's crack after that. But, they had come there, and then they were going out to Joe's grave.
Joe was special.
I was.
Joe was special.
Yeah.
Joe was special. There's nobody would say that. And Brendan would say it. They'd all say it. I think Brendan was probably the incredibly iconic figure. Yes. Brendan was. He had a trained voice. His father was the organist and musical composer for the cathedral in Waterford. His mother was an opera singer. He had a trained voice. His two sisters sang in the choir. So it's just Brendan. But he was a very shy guy.
Was he?
Oh, extraordinarily shy. Oh no, Brendan was and humble guy, humble guy, and would always give credit to somebody else. Never was one to take credit himself. But T.J. Byrne and the Royal Showband just created the business.
Yes.
The Clipper Carltons created the music.
But
the Royal created the business.
That's interesting.
They were the first to do 60/40. They were the first to take the door.
Right.
They were the first to record.
Okay.
They were the first to have dancers on the stage with them. They were an incredibly wonderful band. Nobody will ever take that away from them.
Right.
They were just an amazing band, and they were spectacular to look at. And the Clippers were nearly too early.
Yeah.
By the time the Royal came in '59, the Clippers had been to get theirs from '54.
Yeah.
And they had been around from that. So they were nearly too, but they were still a magnificent band. Terry Wogan would always say he got his interest in music from listening to the Clipper Carltons, from looking at them. He said you went out on stage, immaculate shoes, instruments shining, bringing class stuff, doing, and whether they were miming or singing, you wouldn't know the difference, but they were just an entertainment band.
Terry Wogan mentioned.
Terry always said that.
Yeah.
Indeed, he said it on tape for me for the programme that I did in the Clipper Carltons. Yeah. And Joe Dolan was the same. Joe went to the Clipper Carltons, was only interested in old pop stuff, and he saw the Clipper Carltons, and he said, went home to Ben and the two of them, said, we want to be a band like that.
Isn't that incredible?
Just, Yeah. But the guys were all very good. Joe was, you see, the great thing about the show bands was this. It's pretty much the same in country music. There was an era of guys, of big stars, all with instantly recognisable voices and personalities.
Right.
I mean, Joe Dolan wasn't the same as Dickie Rock.
No.
Nor was he the same as Brendan Bowyer. Yeah. Nor was he the same as Brendan O'Brien. Nor was he the same as soon as 3 words out of any of them, and then you were listening to Doc Carr, Old Man's Road, you just knew exactly they were unique and different and individually marvellous. And what one sang, another couldn't sing. Yeah. And they were just brilliant. But there's a great story about Brenton and the Beatles, you see, which is a true story, an absolutely true story. You know that when in 1962-63 the Royal Showband were voted the best dance band in Britain, and they got the Carol Allen Award, and they had, as part of their duties of winning that, they had to do a series of spectacular shows around Britain. And like they were Billy Cotton and bands and all those, they overcame them. They were the best dance band in Britain in '62, and they were in Liverpool. And the band that played the opening, the relief band, was a little band halfway between the Quarrymen and the Beatles. They opened for the Royal Showband.
Wow!
And they opened. They did. They did, and the Royal Showband had a big van, and when they came off stage that night, these 3-4 young fellas were looking into the big van, and Brenton came out as he was getting in the van. He said, "Do you own this?" "Yeah," so we do. I said, "I wonder will we ever be big enough to have a van like that? Will we ever be big enough to have a van like that?"
Before they became the Beatles, oh my goodness.
And Brenton says, "Well, then he said." Lennon said to him, "Did you listen to us?" Oh, he said, Brenton said, "I did." "What did you think?" He said, "You had the audience going well," but he said, you announced some songs that you had written yourselves. Those were far better than the other ones.
No, isn't that extraordinary? Well spotted, Brenton.
And Brenton spotted that to them, And years later, Michael Hand was the Michael Hand, famous journalist. Yeah. And the Beatles came to Dublin sometime after November 63, and they came to Dublin, and Michael Hand was doing an interview with them, and he was doing it. He said, "The Royal Showband opened for you." I said, "Yeah, they did." He said, "What did you think of them, honestly?" And he said, they were fantastic. He said, "But we actually thought it was a talent show, because one would sing a song, and then another fella come up and sing a song, and then there was 4 singers in it. You see, you had Brenton doing the rock, you had Tom doing the country, you had Charlie Matthews doing the ballads. You see, and you had Jim Conlon doing the rock iron line stuff. Yeah. And he said then they were doing piano solos and they were doing instrumentalists. We thought this was the best talent show. We were wondering who won.
Isn't that something else?
Quite a definition of a show band.
We won't, yes. All talented individuals.
Or there's a show they put on, and he said we genuinely thought it was a talent show. You know, and you have that, you know, and you have little stories like the Cadets, the Rolling Stones saw the Cadets on Top of the Pops with them, and the Jagger and them came afterwards and said, We'll pay you to get rid of those suits because we'd like to run those suits, those white suits, those cadet suits. We'd like to use them.
Imagine Mick Jagger and Keith Quartz.
And they said, no. Pat Murphy wouldn't allow them. Pat, God be good to him.
I know.
Pat wouldn't like a suit going anywhere. So then of course Bowyer was in Vegas, and somebody told Elvis about him, and one night they were doing a big show, and Brandon was doing his Elvis half hour, and this old man with a hat on him came in on a stick and hit Brenton like that on a stick and went back out again, and that was Elvis.
Oh no!
Coming in to see him, and so Elvis's people said he's coming back tomorrow night. We want to box somewhere where he can sit.
My goodness!
So he came back the next night, and Brendan and then put on. Now they're nervous, so he invited them up to his room, and had a good night with them. And he said to Brendan, "You did one song that I've never heard. It's a great song. What was that?" He said, "You gave me a mountain. This time you gave me a mountain." Oh, Brendan says, "That's a country song. That's Marty Robbins did that." He says, "I never heard it." He said, "Would you mind if I took it?"
And he did.
He did.
And he did. Isn't that extraordinary stuff?
Well, Sir Brendan says, "What could I do? I stole all his."
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful anecdote to end on. But forward to next weekend, we sincerely hope you can make it along the Saturday night.
I'd love to.
If you can, Brian.
I'd love to.
I'm doing MC, and I'd love to spot you in the audience and have a natter, you know.
I'd love to because I'm so glad Omagh's doing it.
Yeah, and thank you
because I mean I've set the idea. Now, I'm so glad they ran with it.
Yeah.
So glad.
That's great.
I'm not claiming.
But your contribution overall and these stories.
No, just saying that it was the prompt they needed to.
Yes, it was the prompt. Aye.
Because two great men had died.
Yeah, that's right.
Pio and Brian.
Brian, aye.
I knew Pio was a great man.
Sure, I worked with him.
My
goodness, super good character.
Unbelievable character Pio was. And again, we can't talk about Brian without him because there were two peas in a pod for many years, and died within 3 weeks of each other.
I remember too well.
COVID, and neither of them got a funeral.
No.
I did both the funerals.
No, that's right.
And sure, it was terrible. Yeah. But so that's why, if nothing else, that's why I'm delighted that those two men and Frankie and all the others get the credit they deserved for inventing not only an entertainment industry, but actually for inventing an industry that eventually employed 10,000 people full time. There were 600 bands in Ireland. Professional band.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
As many's a gay night from dark till daylight I spend with people of high renown, but in all their grandeur and heaps to squander, my heart would wander for sweet Omagh town.